What is up, guys? So, a few nights ago, I guess I just didn't have anything better going on, cause I finally bit the bullet and watched The Lion King 2019. But don't worry, I'm gonna save my thoughts for that movie later. The Lord knows I have plenty. But it also did have me thinking just how out of ideas Disney seems to be these days, and the general Hollywood factory, really. I mean, just look at all these remakes. Take all that in. And that's not all either. Apparently in 2021, we've got a live-action Akira coming up, a Chicago-based version of Your Name in the works, and an ever-so-necessary Americanized Train to Busan. Who asked for this? Anyway, I could go on and on about how starved La La Land seems to be for money recently, but I think the more interesting question to ask here is, why are people so addicted to nostalgic remakes and revivals? Your Name and Train to Busan aside, because they're much more recent creations, and let's be real, I feel like their soon-to-be remakes are receiving a lot more criticism than fanfare. Hollywood seems to have cracked this not-so-secret formula of bringing stuff back from people's childhoods, because at this point, it's pretty much guaranteed to rake in the viewers. The Lion King was warthog shit, but it absolutely smashed in the box office. Mortal Kombat has reportedly become the most successful launch item in HBO Max history. Riverdale has literally spun 5 seasons. So yeah, nostalgia is all the rage. We see it in our movies, we see it in our shows, we see it in our fashion. Who knew cargo pants and bucket hats would make a comeback? And as oversaturated as the trend may seem, people, including me at times, still eat this up like candy. But why does it have such a hold on us, these feelings, these memories of the past? We've arguably got a lot of cool shit today. I mean, technology and entertainment has been better than it ever has been. So why is it that we almost want to time warp back into the 90s, or even 80s in some cases? As with all my other videos, let's dive into this. How often do you find yourself reminiscing on your college days, high school days, or even your memories as a child? If you're human and you've had fairly good experiences growing up, then it's likely you've experienced this on a frequent basis. No matter how good you may have it now, revisiting old memories is bound to bring you those warm, comforting, and sentimental feelings that'll make you long for the good old days, as they say. You're given a glimpse of simpler times, and it's very likely that as a child, or as a young adult in college even, you were much more carefree and oblivious to the horrors of adulting and the real world, so to speak. Which is also often why these emotions are a lot more potent among people in their 20s and 30s. These are often more transitional phases in a person's life, but I'll get more into that later on. So interestingly enough, the word nostalgia actually has its roots in Greek, the word nostos meaning to return home and algos meaning pain. This refers to how saddening it often is to be unable to recover or return home to the past, which adds to its appeal and also explains why nostalgic feelings are often bittersweet, or even bring a tinge of sadness to know those days are far behind us. But it's not just this yearning for days past that strengthens nostalgia's grip on us. It's also been found to bring plenty of psychological benefits despite slight feelings of loss or even mourning. For one, it can increase your sense of social connectedness to others, because looking back on these memories can make you feel valued and loved and boosts your perceptions of social support in times of loneliness. And in turn, this could lead to boosts in self-esteem or self-confidence. Basking in nostalgia has also been shown to inspire you or make you more optimistic about the future. But on top of all this, recalling these memories just feels good overall. I mean, you may miss them, but they still offer these soft, fuzzy feelings that can temporarily send you into this relaxed, calm, and peaceful emotional state. And it's exactly these feelings we get when we watch something, say an old cartoon straight out of our childhood. It's not so much the bizarre adventures of Dexter and Dee Dee that have us engaged, although the stories in the show are still pretty lit to this day, but more so our personal memories and associations attached to it. It's why we can also often overlook or forgive the flaws of the stuff that we watched back in the day. They may not be masterpieces, but we enjoy them anyway because of the sentimental value attached to it. And this ties into how nostalgia is significantly able to warp or distort our reality of the past, and instead becomes a sanitized, idealized version in our memory, which again adds to its appeal. Feeling nostalgic for the entertainment of our past can also offer an opportunity for self-reflection. It gives you a chance to look inward and examine the ways these movies or TV shows have carved or influenced your worldviews growing up. Perhaps you discover that your perceptions have changed since then, or that your interpretation notion of a story has evolved since the last time you consumed it as a kid. I mentioned this in my Manic Pixie video, but I read 500 Days of Summer way different as a teenager than when I rewatched it again in my mid-20s. Nostalgia is therefore a pretty powerful force, and it's easy to see why Hollywood has pretty much grabbed it by the horns and sucked it dry. But despite the fact that these feelings are nothing new, it still seems like milking nostalgia seems to be a much more prevalent trend in this day and age. As written by Jake Rawson of Mental Floss, it's not like the 1970s were bountiful with reboots of I Love Lucy, Gunsmoke, or other material from the 1950s. What makes the 21st century unique in this regard? Why is a show's cancellation no longer a guarantee that it will never return? History professor David Gerber from the University of Buffalo pins this on the world's current phase of environmental and political upheaval. People are growing ever more concerned and aware of the planet and the societal issues within it, sparking this greater uptick in collective nostalgia. The longing for a supposedly happier, uncomplicated past, though I believe this also ties into the whole notion of ignorance is bliss. And on top of this, social media has made it a lot easier to share memories or artifacts of the past. There are literally Instagram accounts just dedicated to the aesthetics or TV shows or celebrity icons of the 90s. You can literally hop on YouTube and look up old McDonald's commercials or episodes of Ren and Stimpy. These highly accessible platforms make it so much easier to recall and reminisce on once forgotten events or media. I mean, need we revisit these obnoxious-ass memes? But this rise and widespread use of social media also plays into how, among all other demographics, nostalgia seems to hit harder today with the Millennials. Generation Y has been labeled as many things. You've got your stereotypical entitled and lazy, but you also got idealistic, ambitious, and nowadays, nostalgic. In fact, many would even say we're the most nostalgic generation today. And that's because, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of us are now striding through our 20s and 30s. Many of us are now past the party-filled, young, wild, and carefree phase typical of our younger years, and are starting to face the more serious responsibilities of building a career, living alone, or even starting a family in some cases. And with these milestones typically being turbulent or challenging experiences, it makes sense that our demographic has a tendency to yearn for simpler, more happy-go-lucky times. According to Erica Hepper, a psychologist at the University of Surrey in England, nostalgia actually tends to wane as we age, with those middle-aged and older often experiencing a decline in nostalgic thoughts. And to top this off, your 20s and 30s are typically an age of strong self-reflection. We millennials are experiencing a ton of changes at this point in our lives, which can commonly have us look back and compare just how far we've come. But of course, with that comes the temptation to bask in some of our favorite positive memories, triggering that desire to relive or revisit the past. Of course, like I said, being a generation of greater social, political, and environmental awareness, along with having to struggle with increasingly high costs of living, we're much more likely than other demographics to yearn for simpler times. And while it's debatable whether we're the most nostalgic generation in history, nostalgia has definitely been emphasized among our generation through our passionate, active use of social media and the internet. Cyberspace has definitely given us an avenue to indulge our nostalgia cravings in ways that previous generations never could. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to see it, the entertainment industry has caught on to this. Both our generation's growing hunger for nostalgia and the incredibly easy ways this trend has proliferated through the help of the internet. Thus, we've got the rise of the remakes. Now, I want to preface this segment with the disclaimer that hashtag not all remakes, or revivals, or reboots are bad. We do live in a world where the Dark Knight trilogy exists, after all. Planet of the Apes was also a fun little film series. True Grit by the Coen brothers will always be one of my favorites from the duo. Blade Runner 2049 was actually better than the original for me, and Cronenberg's The Fly is a classic and undoubtedly looked a lot more unnerving and sinister than the 1958 original. So I'm not about to mouth off on how remakes bad, because evidently there are plenty of cases where they're done really well, and I'm sure we're gonna get a lot more of these refreshing and upgraded takes in the future. But these are the key words here. Refreshing and upgraded. Because if I may put forth a hot take, most of these obvious cash grabs from millennial childhoods, they aren't it. And I'm gonna mainly put Disney's ass on blast in this one because their Renaissance movies very likely played a key role in most millennials' lives growing up. Many of us were, between the ages of 5 and 10 when we first watched The Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast. So what better way to make bank than to revive some of these pivotal and arguably most popular movies of our childhood for us, the world's currently most nostalgic generation. Lo and behold, that that is exactly what they did. And they gave us this. Gee, thanks, Disney. You shouldn't have. And I mean it, you really shouldn't have. Now, were these films doomed to fail from the start? Of course not. Like I said, there are effective ways to make a well-written quality remake. And hey, at the same time, bank on our love for these films. As Wisecrack breaks down perfectly in their video, How Remakes Go Wrong, featuring Disney's The Lion King and Aladdin, a remake succeeds best when it respects the original source material, improves the original in certain ways, and preserves what was loved about the original in the first place. And while the first one may be debatable in these cases, I feel like it's safe to say that all of Disney's recent remakes have failed to either advance or even maintain aspects of what made the original so good, with a few exceptions. The Jungle Book and Maleficent, Disney's closest to a Sleeping Beauty remake, at least have original stories even if they aren't perfect, and at least Kenneth Branagh's 2015 Cinderella fleshed out the romance a bit more. And I have to admit, while the original is miles better, 2017's Beauty and the Beast had some pretty great performances by Luke Evans that made it fun to watch. Doesn't make it any less unnecessary, but with the acting and the sets and the casting, I enjoyed it for what it was. But take The Lion King for example, never have I felt both embarrassed and irrationally pissed while watching a movie. I absolutely loved the original as a kid, and to this day it sits as one of my top 10 favorite films of all time. But even aside my subjective passion for the movie, it's without a doubt been hailed as an animated classic among critics and mainstream audiences. It's won Academy Awards, it's won Golden Globes, it got admitted into the US National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as a culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant film. It's left this entire legacy, and to this day, it looks absolutely gorgeous. And what do we get with the 2019 version? Wow, thanks! I always wondered what the original would look like, stripped of all color and expression, and what was arguably its best song. I mean, look at this. Is he happy? Is he sad? Is he bored? Excuse me, I can't read lion emotions. This scene was one of the most emotional of the original movie, and it looks goofy as shit in this version. A remake like this, although admittedly a technical marvel in terms of how far CGI has come, definitely comes off as something made to bank or milk our nostalgic cravings, rather than something that was actually made out of passionate original ideas. Every single change seems to have been done for the worse. Their quote-unquote live-action faces make them look dead inside. James Earl Jones sounds like he threw in the towel. Seth Rogen can't sing. In fact, listening to the soundtrack is a completely joyless experience, in that I know there's already a version that exists, just better. Other changes seem to be completely unnecessary, like removing Rafiki's stick, cause Favreau apparently thought it wouldn't be too realistic. Like, man, thanks, I was worried that was gonna shatter the realism and not the fact that he's a literal talking animal. But lest I develop a stroke right here and now, that's about enough of that disaster. We can also see the very same flaws, albeit slightly less egregiously, with 2019's Aladdin. This movie, to be frank, had absolutely no soul. The choreography was bland and downright awful at times. I mean, what are you doing? Just jump over the poles. The casting was a wreck, except maybe Naomi Scott, because she can actually sing, and I guess Will Smith, I don't know, was charismatic as usual. The songs were auto-tuned to hell, the newly added song was pretty hilarious, and the Cave of Wonders was so f***ing lame. Are you telling me, Disney, that you exhausted your CGI talents to make a Nat Geo musical no one asked for, and you couldn't have animated the f***ing Cave of Wonders? And yet, because Aladdin's one of the most beloved Disney classics to date, and it preserved one of the original's greatest strengths, Menken and Rice's fantastically written soundtrack, albeit modernized and digitized, it still, of course, drew in a good number of either eager or morbidly curious viewers. And by a good number, I mean they raked in a cool $1 billion. Holy shit. And redundant as it may be to say it, this is the driving factor behind Disney's endless stream of remakes and revivals. They work. They make bank. In fact, all in all, Disney's remakes have grossed over $7 billion globally since 2010. I know I've been going hard on their stuff specifically, but Disney isn't the only one cashing in on this trend. Nostalgic cash grabs, they're making money for movie studios in general. In the last decade, we've gotten Ninja Turtles, Transformers, Terminator Genesis, Jumanji, It, The Mummy, The Amazing Spider-Man, The Masterpiece, that was The Last Airbender, and they all rolled in the cash, regardless of whether they were written well or otherwise. Now that's not to say they all did. Hellboy 2019, for example, worked on a budget of $50 million and made a mere $55 in the box office. Yikes. Dumbo had a lackluster performance, and reportedly, so did Mulan. And Rupert Sanders' incredibly boring Ghost in the Shell barely broke even. Still, the potential pros outweigh the cons, and for a lot of movie companies, it's still a relatively low-risk way to rake in millions of cash. You could say it's already enough of a challenge to buy people's time for a good 2 hours, and studio executives have investors at their heels. So to them, it's much less of a gamble to revive something that's already been pre-loved. And not only that, it also takes a much more low-effort process, since it's not like original stories or characters or soundtracks are developed from scratch. By recycling old IP, movie studios can rest easy knowing that all the emotional investment has already been done for them. As stated by pop culture expert Walt Hickey of 538, you bank on content where people already have a sense of the characters, they have a sense of what the plot is and what the story is. Storytelling and direction be damned! Look, it's your favorite Disney songs and characters on screen, now give us money, bitch! The appeal of the familiar is enough to get us in those seats, even if most of us know that deep down, nothing could really replace the sentimental value or even quality of the original. Wisecrack also touched upon this with a statement by film scholar Anat Zonger verifying this phenomena, that it's a common and somewhat masochistic desire of movie audiences to repeat an experience despite knowing it'll never be the same. So regardless of how shit a remake might look, many people will still watch with that sliver of hope that they may relive the same enjoyable experience. Or they may simply be there to make comparisons to the original, or to simply give it a hate watch. Whatever approach, the studios win. Another theory for why nostalgia is all the rage these days is our current era of mass choice and on-demand entertainment. With thousands of shows and movies at our fingertips, courtesy of popular streaming platforms like Netflix, HBO, and Disney+, competition has never been greater for the film industry. And it's a bit of a greater challenge to get butts in cinema seats when you can literally roll over from your bed and watch a Netflix movie straight from your phone. Beth Sodden of the Film Magazine put it well when she said that perhaps having these nostalgic feature film releases are movie studios' way of saying, come back to the cinema, we have all your childhood favorites. And while not necessarily a lazy strategy in milking a franchise, sequels also work in similar ways in that they bank on one's existing attachment to a certain IP. Now, they've obviously been around longer than today's millennial nostalgic cash cow, and in saying that, there have been plenty of amazing ones, even if they did come out years later to scratch our nostalgic itch. Some were even better than their original counterparts, and I do think there is greater opportunity in making a standout quality film with a sequel because, unlike a remake, you get to make a whole new original story from scratch. You get to develop your characters further, expand the lore and world within the story, introduce new characters and concepts, basically enrich the original source material. And I mean, hell, that's why we got all these classic film series. But that, of course, is the best case scenario. Sadly, there have also been plenty that ignore all of that and simply tack on a half-assed story that bank on the same characters we know and love. Some seem to miss the point of the original and simply rely on recycling surface-level aspects of it, and others may just recycle the original's entire story altogether. And that's when you get vapid, soulless, cash-grab sequels, and what do you know? Disney's been infamous for those too. Why must you keep betraying me so? But hey, you know what? I've spent a good chunk of time on camera crying about what makes a remake or sequel bad, so what are some cases of nostalgic remakes, revivals, or callbacks done well, and what exactly made them so successful in that regard? Contrary to what you may think, I am not just a raging millennial fangirl. I can appreciate a well-written callback when it's there. But before I get into that, let's take an ad break. So, you want to take part in a creative venture. Maybe it's photography, graphic design, or creative writing. Maybe it's sitting in front of a camera and ranting about shitty Hollywood films.
What the frick are you guys doing? Asking for all this frickin' garbage!
Wherever your passions lie, there's no better platform for building your skills than Skillshare. Hosting thousands of online classes across areas of film, art, business, and even lifestyle, Skillshare provides an active learning community for millions of creatives across the globe. There's a class for nearly everything on here. Looking to make videos online? Take up a class on YouTube. Want to make a shot-for-shot, hyper-realistic CGI remake of a Goofy movie? That's questionable, but hey, the platform's got a ton of animation classes to choose from if you're just starting out. If you guys didn't know, I actually loved to draw back in the day, and it's something I should really get back into. And honestly, I couldn't have had better inspiration than the Skillshare class on character illustration, hosted by one of my favorite artists to date, Gabriel Piccolo. I adore this guy's work, particularly his fan art of Teen Titans, so if you've yet to check them out, I highly recommend you do on his socials, and maybe even check out his class on here to find out just how he creates them. The guy's got awesome, detailed advice on crafting character poses, expressions, and even adding in color, so if you're interested in learning to draw or simply want tips from one of the greats, don't miss out on his class. To top it all off, students can enjoy their entire learning experience ad-free, and the platform is constantly launching new premium classes. It's normally 10 Aussie dollars or around $8 US a month for a premium membership, which is already a pretty good deal, but the first 1,000 of my subs to click the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare's premium membership. So go check it out, you never know what new interest, hobby, or creative projects you'll pick up. And I was kidding about the CGI Goofy movie, by the way. Don't do that, that'd be terrifying. So as mentioned, nostalgic retellings can be done well when they preserve the core elements of what made the original great, while offering improvements or a fresh new twist to the story. And one of the biggest examples to come to mind is the recent reboot of Peter Parker's Spider-Man movies featuring Tom Holland, where of course, plenty of moviegoers were drawn in through their longtime love of the web-slinging hero, and were curious on whether this new guy could pull him off. And what do you know? He did, and I personally think he's the best Peter to date. But viewers weren't just given a splash of comic book familiarity with this reboot. We were also given an all-new story to enjoy. I mean, we all know how the Uncle Ben or Spidey Power stuff goes down, and it's pretty cool how Holland's debut film as Spider-Man decided to skip all the well-worn origin stuff and jump right into his arc with Tony. We were also given a new and less mopey best friend, an all-new love interest, and an interesting villain who isn't just chaotic or mustache-twirlingly evil. And another nostalgic remake that comes to mind is It. The first one. Yeah, I wouldn't bother with the second chapter. Now, while Tim Curry could never be replaced, and his portrayal of Pennywise will forever haunt my memories, Andy Muschietti's remake took care in fleshing out the children's backstories and relationships at a deeper level than the original. It also wasn't afraid to get a little more dark, disturbing, and tackled some pretty mature issues that made the story all the more effective and haunting. And at the same time, it preserved the creepiness of the original film, and I personally think Skarsgård did his role justice, despite having large shoes to fill. I mean, these are just two examples, but both movies go to show how successful a remake can be, both film quality and box office wise, by doing more than just being a pale, careless imitation of the original material. But as mentioned, remakes aren't the only way to bank on our childhood memories. Hollywood's also found that reviving a certain IP and expanding on a bygone narrative can do well to attract and appease audiences of that generation. And I would be a fool to not mention Adult Swim's unexpected yet highly demanded revival of Samurai Jack. Now, this new series could have easily gone down the shitter. Since the original show ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, studio execs could have simply gone with some hackneyed ending and called it a day. After all that's missing is a happy ending. That's all you guys want, right? Well, thankfully, we actually got people who gave a shit. 2017 Samurai Jack offers us a beautiful continuation of the original story and wastes no time in reintroducing us to the characters we know well and love. In fact, the opening scene of the first episode serves as a quick reminder of the premise and the struggles of our main hero that got us invested years back to begin with. But as the show goes on, you realize it's not just a weak zombie of what it once was, but a darker, more mature version of the show we watched as kids. Basically, Genndy Tartakovsky had it grow up with a generation who loved it, raising the stakes for our characters and tackling more complex, intense adult themes. It was an absolutely worthy and emotional follow-up to a cartoon that held sentimental value for most of us, and offered a more serious, profound storyline better fit to our current age range. That is, until the last 2 or 3 episodes. I'm not sure if I'm in the minority here, but I feel like this series lost its steam towards the finale. Nevertheless, I still feel like the previous episodes make the viewing experience as a whole worthwhile. You can still tell at least that the creators took care in bringing the show back to life. And let me tell you, in the first half, it was pretty much perfect. So if you grew up with the show and still have yet to check it out, I do recommend it. And though I have less emotional investment with this one, we can still see the same grown-up, updated changes when they resuscitated Animaniacs in 2020. While many Fox Kids veterans understandably had their doubts, the show was able to unexpectedly deliver on the same charm, wittiness, and hilarious satire of the original, just updated to appeal to modern culture and politics. You still get your beloved trio of troublemakers, and of course, Pinky and the Brain make recurring appearances, playing on our long-lost love for these characters while satirizing current topics with actual quality writing and modern-day humor. I guess it helped to have the original creator and Steven Spielberg at the helm, and the show did well enough both critically and financially to have another season coming out this year, and a 3rd season already ordered. Finally, I want to dive into how studios or filmmakers often milk nostalgia, not through full-on remakes or revivals, but through little callbacks, homages, and references in their movies or TV shows. characters. Now, I feel like these are best done when they actually play an essential role in the story and drive the plot forward. You know, there's a reason why they're there. They're not just shoehorned in to be like, you see this? You remember this? You remember that? And a good comparison that comes to mind for me is the music used in Guardians of the Galaxy versus the soundtrack of the regrettable and embarrassing 2016 Suicide Squad. Sorry to remind you of this one. Anyway, one of the most memorable aspects of Guardians was its recurring use of 60s and 70s hits. And I'm aware this isn't specifically aimed at a millennial audience unless, hey, you grew up listening to these songs, but in general, it was a subtle nostalgic reference to the music of past decades, and a pretty significant one at that. James Gunn didn't just pick these songs cause he liked them and he thought the audience would too, but because they form a core part of Star-Lord's character. It's this music that keeps him connected to Earth, and he reportedly picked those from the 60s to 70s era cause he believed that's what Star-Lord's mom would have been listening to while he was growing up. Coincidentally enough, while we obviously weren't alive in that era, I feel like plenty of viewers from my generation would have also grown up with their parents listening to these songs, making for a few throwbacks throughout the movie. Additionally, Gunn also stated that he, quote, really baked the music into the movie. Instead of tacking it on at the end of the filmmaking process, he actually wanted to make sure that the soundtrack was written directly into the screenplay, actively used to drive the plot forward. Now contrast this to David Ayer's Suicide Squad, which also used classic and popular throwback hits like Without Me by Eminem, Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes, and Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. And sure, all these are bangers, but without a cohesive theme and with their forced application throughout the movie, particularly with the random Bohemian Rhapsody at the end that didn't feel suited to the scene at all, they felt more like a cheap ploy to have audiences go, oh, I remember that song, and it honestly just felt pretty lame and uncreative in my opinion. But going back to actually effective callbacks and to use another superhero product, WandaVision is another and probably most recent example of nostalgic references done well, and just a warning, but there are slight spoilers ahead. The show creatively parodies and satirizes classic sitcoms throughout most of its run, starting with the 1950s aesthetic of shows like I Love Lucy, The Twilight Zone, and Leave It to Beaver, cruising its way through the cheesiness of The Brady Bunch and Full House, until finally breaking the fourth wall with early 2000s shows like Malcolm in the Middle and The Office. And no, these aren't just random parodies, directorial styles, and childhood throwbacks for the sake of it. They actually play a critical and pivotal part of the show, deeply tying into the storyline and development of our lead characters. But that's all I'm gonna say because this was a great show, and if you've grown tired of the usual Marvel fare, then this was a pretty cool one to check out. Finally, and you've probably been waiting for this one, it'd be careless of me to not mention the Netflix smash hit, Stranger Things. And while, once again, 80s homages and references in these shows may not be specific to millennials, the series is still an excellent demonstration of nostalgic entertainment done right. You can tell the Duffer Brothers know and love their 80s sci-fi shit and pay respectful, meaningful tribute to some of the genre's best tropes and icons of the decade. And the thing is, they all make sense within the context of the story. The show is set in the mid-80s after all, so cameos of classic video games, movies, New Coke, and a whole ass mall appear naturally within the show. And on top of that, the series holds plenty of references to classic 80s films, these including E.T., Stand By Me, Firestarter, and Alien, but again, all homages fit in forming or driving the story forward. They actually make up an organic part of the plot rather than being mere triggers for our past memories. Each of these examples are pretty much proof that nostalgia can be wielded to create actual quality pieces of entertainment. Sadly, none of my ramblings are going to change things. Hollywood's still going to be a cynical factory for pumping out mediocre remakes and revivals, and I and many others on YouTube will at least have content to make out of them. What a beautiful, symbiotic relationship. But hey, you know, on the upside, for every 10 awful cash grabs we get, we'll at least get one Stranger Things, or one Homecoming, or one Samurai Jack Season 5, episodes 1 to 7. It could have been perfect, Gendy. It could have been perfect. Anyway, that's pretty much a wrap for this video. As usual, feel free to share your thoughts on the recent trend of nostalgic comebacks in movies and TV shows these days, any remakes or revivals that you actually like and are probably worth seeing, or any in the making that you're against. I, for one, actually felt a brief, temporary feeling of grief when I heard that an Office reboot was possibly underway. There's a reason why it's still one of the most streamed shows on Netflix today, you know? It's still good. Anyhow, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't yet, consider subscribing if you want to see more of these pop culture commentary / video essays. Oh, and be sure to hit that notification bell to keep up to date on my latest uploads. Thanks again, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.